What if I told you that the two homeless, elderly people everyone pitied were actually living inside one of the most incredible homes in America? After their children sold the family house and disappeared, 78-year-old Harold and his wife, Clara, vanished into the Redwood forest. Then one curious YouTuber secretly followed them and discovered a hidden door carved into a 2,000-year-old tree. Behind it wasn't an abandoned shelter, but a warm, self-sustaining home that would inspire millions and forever change what people believed a home could be. Late autumn settled quietly over Redwood National Park beneath a pale silver sky. Cool Pacific winds drifted through towering redwoods, carrying the scent of damp moss and cedar, while fallen fern leaves softened every step across the silent forest floor. Harold Miller had spent 78 years believing that a home was never defined by walls, but by the people who waited inside. Standing just over 6 feet tall, he still carried the broad shoulders of the carpenter he had been for more than 5 decades, although age had gently bent his posture. Thick silver hair framed a deeply weathered face, while a neatly trimmed white beard surrounded a strong jaw that had once been known throughout the county for its determination. His steel blue eyes remained calm, thoughtful, and kind, yet weeks of quiet disappointment had left a sadness no amount of courage could completely hide. Deep calluses covered his large hands, earned honestly after years of building houses, restoring barns, crafting furniture, and repairing almost anything his neighbors brought to him. Harold never considered himself remarkable. He simply believed that if someone needed help, you helped them. His father often joked that Harold trusted people longer than people deserved. Losing faith in others was something he had never learned to do. Beside him stood Clara Miller, his 75-year-old wife, and the one person who had shared every joy, every hardship, and every ordinary morning since they married 53 years earlier. Clara possessed a graceful, slender figure that age had never diminished. Shoulder-length silver hair rested beneath a soft knitted brown hat, and warm hazel eyes reflected a lifetime of patience, compassion, and quiet wisdom. Gentle wrinkles surrounded a smile that had comforted countless frightened children during the years she volunteered at the local elementary school library. Her hands appeared delicate, but years spent gardening, sewing, cooking, and caring for her family had made them remarkably strong. Unlike Harold, Clara often sensed pain before anyone spoke about it. She had an unusual gift for making broken people feel less alone simply by sitting beside them without saying very much. Only 3 months earlier, they had still lived inside a modest cedar farmhouse overlooking the edge of Redwood National Park. Harold had built that house with his own father before Daniel Boone movies stopped playing in local theaters. Every room carried memories. Pencil marks on a kitchen doorway measured the children's heights. Clara's rocking chair still faced the fireplace where family Christmas mornings had once begun. The old porch overlooked the valley where deer wandered at sunrise. To Harold and Clara, the house was not expensive. It was irreplaceable. Their children saw something different. Their son, Ryan Miller, 50 years old, had become a successful commercial real estate developer in Sacramento. Tall, clean-shaven, and always dressed in expensive tailored suits, Ryan possessed sharp green eyes and the confidence of someone who had spent decades negotiating million-dollar contracts. Intelligent and hardworking, he genuinely loved his parents. But years inside the business world slowly taught him to measure security through financial assets instead of memories. When several risky investments collapsed beneath unexpected market changes, overwhelming debt followed quickly behind. Standing beside him during every difficult decision was his younger sister, Emily Foster, 46, a financial advisor known for her polished appearance, shoulder-length dark brown hair, elegant business attire, and calm professional voice. Emily had inherited Clara's kindness, but buried much of it beneath constant anxiety about money and stability. She convinced herself that practical decisions were always kinder than emotional ones, even when her heart quietly disagreed. Together, they sold the family home. They promised Harold and Clara everything would only be temporary. "You'll stay in a nice assisted living community for a little while," Ryan had explained gently. "As soon as things settle down, we'll bring you to Sacramento." Emily smiled reassuringly. "You'll have nurses, warm meals, and people around you all the time." Harold simply nodded. He believed every promise. Parents almost always do. But 1 week became 2, then another. Phone calls grew shorter. Messages became excuses. Soon there was only silence. Several employees at the assisted living facility noticed Harold standing outside every afternoon around 4 o'clock. That had always been the time his children visited years earlier. Eventually, he stopped waiting by the entrance. One evening, Clara quietly folded their clothes into 2 old canvas bags. "I don't want strangers deciding when we eat," she whispered. Harold looked at her for several long seconds. Neither of them needed another conversation. Before sunrise the following morning, they quietly left. They never told anyone where they were going. Within days, rumors spread throughout Crescent City. Someone claimed they had seen the elderly couple pushing an old wooden handcart filled with reclaimed lumber toward the forest. Another fisherman insisted he watched Harold collecting fallen cedar branches beside an abandoned trail. A park volunteer believed Clara was carrying blankets deeper into the woods. No one understood why. Without answers, people created their own. They're homeless now. They must be sleeping somewhere in the forest. Those poor old folks. Harold and Clara heard none of it. Every morning they disappeared beneath the towering redwoods before sunrise. Every evening they returned only long enough to purchase simple groceries before vanishing again. Their routine became the town's newest mystery. Curiosity eventually attracted someone else. Ethan Brooks was 28 years old, tall and lean with messy dark blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and the restless energy of someone constantly searching for the next story. His YouTube channel specialized in unusual human interest stories across Northern California. Unlike creators who stage drama for attention, Ethan genuinely enjoyed discovering forgotten places and overlooked people. His grandfather had once been homeless after losing everything in a wildfire, an experience that made Ethan instinctively stop whenever he saw someone struggling. Still, he also understood that emotional stories attracted millions of viewers. One afternoon, he spotted Harold and Clara slowly pushing their weathered wooden cart loaded with reclaimed timber, old windows, blankets, and basic supplies along a narrow forest path. From a respectful distance, Ethan quietly filmed them. The elderly couple never looked back. That evening, he uploaded a short video. Its title read, "The Homeless Grandparents Living Inside the Forest." By sunrise, the video had already been viewed more than 3 million times. Comments flooded in from across America. Many offered prayers. Others demanded someone rescue the elderly couple. Some criticized their children without knowing the full story. Ethan read every comment. Something about Harold and Clara continued bothering him. They never begged. They never searched through trash. They walked with purpose, almost as if they already knew exactly where they were going. 3 nights later, long after the town had fallen asleep, Ethan quietly parked his truck near the edge of Redwood National Park, switched off his flashlight, picked up his camera, and began following the elderly couple into the darkness beneath the giant trees. The moon hung high above Redwood National Park, casting pale silver light through the towering canopy of ancient redwoods. Cool ocean mist drifted silently between the enormous trunks while the forest seemed to breathe with a quiet rhythm older than human memory. Ethan Brooks kept nearly 50 yards behind Harold and Clara, careful not to let the crunch of fallen twigs betray his presence. Years of filming wildlife documentaries had taught him how to move quietly through forests, but tonight every sound seemed impossibly loud. His camera remained switched to night mode, recording only silhouettes beneath the moonlight. The elderly couple never looked behind them. They walked slowly, pushing the same weathered wooden handcart loaded with reclaimed timber, folded blankets, old windows, several canvas bags, and bundles of firewood. Yet despite their age, neither appeared lost. Harold walked with the quiet confidence of someone following a path he had traveled hundreds of times. The deeper they entered the forest, the quieter everything became. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Towering redwoods rose into darkness like enormous cathedral columns. Their reddish bark reflected faint moonlight, while moss covered nearly every fallen branch. Ethan noticed that Harold occasionally stopped, resting one weathered hand against a massive trunk as though greeting an old friend before continuing. Clara quietly smiled each time she watched him. There was no fear in either of them. After nearly 40 minutes, Harold finally slowed. Ahead stood the largest tree Ethan had ever seen. Its colossal trunk disappeared into darkness above, so enormous that even several people holding hands could never surround it. Time had carved deep furrows into its bark, while ferns and hanging moss concealed much of its lower trunk. Under ordinary circumstances, it looked like nothing more than another ancient redwood that had survived thousands of years. Harold gently placed the handcart beside the tree. Ethan crouched behind a fallen log. His camera focused carefully. Harold stepped toward one section of bark covered by thick moss. Instead of knocking, he slipped his fingers beneath what appeared to be an ordinary strip of weathered bark. With surprising ease, the entire section swung outward. Ethan froze. It wasn't bark. It was a perfectly crafted wooden panel disguised so naturally that even standing only a few feet away, no visitor would ever have recognized it. Behind it, a solid cedar door appeared. The hinges made almost no sound. Warm golden light spilled gently into the cool night air. Ethan lowered his camera for several seconds. He honestly wondered whether exhaustion had begun playing tricks on his eyes. The elderly couple everyone believed to be homeless had just unlocked a hidden entrance inside a living tree. Harold smiled toward Clara. Home. She laughed softly. I'll make some tea. They stepped inside. The hidden door closed almost silently. The giant redwood looked completely ordinary once again. Ethan waited several minutes before quietly approaching. His heartbeat pounded so loudly he feared Harold might somehow hear it through the massive trunk. Curiosity finally overcame hesitation. The hidden panel had not fully closed. A narrow gap remained. Carefully, Ethan looked inside. His breath caught. Nothing resembled the shelter he had expected. Instead of cold dirt, he saw polished wooden floors. Warm cedar walls curved naturally with the living interior of the ancient tree. Soft amber lights illuminated every corner. A beautiful stone fireplace glowed gently near the center of the room. Above it hung a simple wooden cross. The smell of cedar mixed with fresh bread and burning firewood drifted through the opening. Harold quietly added another log to the fire. Clara removed a kettle from a cast-iron stove before pouring hot tea into two handmade ceramic mugs. Neither spoke very much. Neither seemed hurried. They simply looked peaceful. Ethan slowly scanned the room with his camera. Everything had been built with remarkable care. Handcrafted shelves followed the natural curves of the tree without cutting into the living wood. A small wooden dining table stood beside two comfortable rocking chairs. Neatly folded blankets rested upon a handmade bed tucked against the interior wall. Simple curtains covered small circular windows that blended almost invisibly with the bark outside. Nothing felt luxurious. Everything felt loved. Near the fireplace stood a modest bookshelf containing dozens of worn novels, history books, gardening guides, woodworking manuals, and several well-used Bibles. Framed family photographs rested on a narrow shelf. Ethan recognized younger versions of Harold and Clara smiling with two small children decades earlier. His chest tightened. These weren't people hiding from life. They were protecting the only home they still had. Just then Clara looked toward Harold. Do you ever miss the old house? Harold stared quietly into the dancing fire. Sometimes. He smiled gently. But walls don't make a home. He looked around the living tree. The people inside always did. Outside, Ethan slowly lowered his camera. For the first time since starting his YouTube career, he realized he possessed footage capable of changing millions of minds. But another question now weighed heavily upon him. Did the world deserve to know about this place? Or did this extraordinary home deserve to remain exactly where it had quietly lived all along? Hidden inside a tree that had kept its secret for nearly 2,000 years? Morning sunlight filtered gently through the towering redwood canopy, painting ribbons of golden light across the forest floor, while cool Pacific mist slowly disappeared between trees that had stood silently for nearly 2,000 years. Ethan Brooks barely slept after discovering the hidden home. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the warm glow of the fireplace inside the living tree and the peaceful expressions on Harold and Clara's faces. His camera contained footage unlike anything he had ever filmed, yet he hesitated. Throughout his career, he had promised himself never to exploit vulnerable people simply for views. But something about this story felt different. It was not exposing someone's secret. It was revealing a truth the world desperately needed to see. Early the following morning, Ethan returned to the giant redwood alone. Instead of hiding, he quietly knocked on the concealed wooden door. Several seconds later it opened. Harold smiled as though he had expected him. I wondered how long it would take. Ethan lowered his camera. I'm sorry for following you. Harold chuckled softly. A man who walks through these woods with a camera makes more noise than he thinks. Clara laughed warmly from inside. We've known since the first night. Embarrassed, Ethan apologized again. Instead of becoming angry, Harold stepped aside. Come in. For the first time, Ethan crossed the threshold. Immediately he understood why Harold never described this place as a shelter. It truly felt like a home. Warm cedar walls curved naturally with the living interior of the ancient redwood. Instead of forcing straight lines into nature, every shelf, cabinet, and doorway had been carefully shaped to follow the tree's natural form. Morning sunlight entered through cleverly hidden circular windows that blended perfectly with the bark outside, filling the room with soft golden light. Near the center stood a beautiful stone fireplace built from river rocks Harold had collected over many years. Gentle flames crackled quietly, spreading warmth through the entire home without filling it with smoke. Harold explained that carefully designed ventilation hidden inside the natural hollow carried heat upward while allowing fresh air to circulate constantly. Against one curved wall stood a compact kitchen. A traditional wood-burning stove heated breakfast while a cast-iron kettle quietly steamed. Simple handmade cupboards held neatly organized dishes. Nothing expensive, nothing unnecessary. Everything had a purpose. Ethan noticed several small electrical lights glowing softly overhead. You have electricity? Harold smiled. Only what we need. He guided Ethan outside through another hidden passage behind the tree. Nearly invisible among surrounding branches sat several weathered solar panels carefully positioned where they received sunlight without disturbing the forest. They're old, Harold admitted. But sunshine doesn't care how expensive the panels are. Behind the tree, rain gutters carved from reclaimed cedar directed water into underground storage tanks hidden beneath thick ferns. Layers of gravel, charcoal, and natural sand filtered the collected rainwater before it entered the cabin. We've never needed city water, Clara explained. The forest has always provided enough. Inside again, Ethan wandered toward a small corner lined with handcrafted bookshelves. Dozens of worn books filled the shelves. Woodworking, gardening, bird identification, American history, poetry, old family Bibles. Every volume showed signs of being read repeatedly. Beside the library stood two handmade rocking chairs facing the fireplace. Clara smiled. Every evening we read together. A simple wooden dining table occupied the center of the room. Only two chairs surrounded it. Yet fresh wildflowers rested in a small glass jar at its center. Near the back of the cabin, a modest bedroom held a handcrafted cedar bed covered with thick quilts Clara had sewn over many winters. Folded blankets rested neatly at its foot. Nothing felt luxurious. Everything felt deeply loved. Ethan's eyes eventually stopped at the photographs decorating one wall. There were wedding pictures, childhood birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings, family reunions. The life Harold and Clara had spent decades building still surrounded them. Harold quietly joined him. I kept every photograph. His voice remained calm. Because memories deserve better than storage boxes. For several minutes no one spoke. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had stayed with him since the first night. Why build all of this here? Harold looked slowly around the room. His eyes rested on Clara, then on the fireplace, then on the family photographs. Finally, he smiled. I didn't build a place to hide from the world. He gently rested one weathered hand against the living redwood wall. I built a place to remember that I still had a home. Ethan lowered his camera. Those words struck him harder than anything he had filmed. Several days later, after asking Harold and Clara for permission, Ethan carefully edited the documentary. He removed every detail that might reveal the exact location of the tree. No maps, no trail markers, no identifying landmarks. Only the story. The video appeared online beneath a simple title. The homeless grandparents who built a home inside a giant redwood. No one expected what happened next. Within 24 hours, 10 million people had watched. By the end of the week, more than 30 million viewers from around the world had shared the story. Millions admired the remarkable hidden home. But even more people found themselves asking a different question. How many people had they quietly judged, without ever knowing the story hidden behind their front door? 3 months after Ethan Brooks published his documentary, the hidden home inside the ancient redwood had become one of the most discussed architectural mysteries in America. Millions admired its beauty, yet Harold Miller continued living exactly as he always had. Every morning he split firewood, checked the rainwater filters, polished the old cast-iron stove, and walked quietly beneath the towering redwoods with Clara beside him. Fame had changed the world around them, but it had not changed the rhythm of their lives. Ethan had honored his promise by never revealing the tree's location, yet the documentary attracted experts from every field who became fascinated less by the house itself than by the remarkable way it existed without harming the ancient tree. The first visitor arrived with Harold's permission. Her name was Dr. Rebecca Lawson, a 56-year-old environmental engineer from Stanford University. Tall and athletic, with short silver-streaked black hair tucked beneath a field cap, sharp green eyes behind lightweight glasses, and sun-weathered skin earned through years of ecological research, Rebecca had spent nearly 30 years designing sustainable water systems for remote communities. Calm, analytical, and endlessly curious, she believed the best engineering solutions usually copied nature instead of fighting it. After watching Ethan's documentary, she admitted she could barely sleep until she understood how the elderly couple had created such an extraordinary home. Several days later, she arrived with a small multidisciplinary research team that included an architect, a forestry specialist, and a conservation biologist. Harold welcomed them warmly, but before anyone entered the tree, he quietly made one request. "If this house teaches you anything," he said with a gentle smile, "please remember the tree matters more than the house." Every visitor nodded. The inspection began outside. Architects expected to find heavy foundations drilled into the trunk. They found none. Instead, Harold explained that every structural component rested on an independent wooden framework carefully suspended inside the naturally hollow cavity. Nothing supporting the house depended on bolts driven into the living wood. Small adjustable braces gently stabilized the interior without restricting the tree's natural movement during storms. The lead architect walked slowly around the massive trunk several times. He shook his head in disbelief. "The house isn't attached to the tree." Harold smiled. "No, the house is simply borrowing shelter." Inside, the researchers examined every corner. They discovered that fresh air entered through hidden vents naturally concealed within existing openings in the hollow trunk. Warm air from the stone fireplace rose upward through carefully positioned ventilation channels before leaving through an exhaust opening high above, creating continuous natural airflow without electric fans. The forestry specialist measured air quality repeatedly. Every reading surprised him. "There isn't any trapped smoke." Harold laughed softly. "Trees have been breathing much longer than we have." Outside again, Dr. Rebecca Lawson carefully inspected the rainwater collection system. Rain flowing down the enormous trunk naturally entered handcrafted cedar gutters positioned without cutting into the bark. Water traveled into underground storage tanks filtered through gravel, charcoal, and sand before entering the cabin. Rebecca studied years of Harold's handwritten records. "You've never run out of water?" Harold gently shook his head. "The forest always gives enough." She smiled. "Only because you've learned never to take more than you need." The team next examined the electrical system. Several modest solar panels rested on removable frames positioned in a nearby clearing where sunlight reached the ground. No concrete foundations had been poured. Every cable ran through protective conduits that avoided damaging roots. Small battery units stored enough energy for lights, radio communication, and essential household needs. The conservation biologist quietly looked around. "If you removed everything tomorrow," Harold finished the sentence, "the tree would keep growing." Exactly. Nothing permanent had been forced upon it. Every shelf, every wall, every floor panel, every window, every pipe, every wire, every beam could be carefully removed without leaving lasting damage behind. By the final afternoon, the researchers gathered beneath the giant redwood to compare their findings. Dr. Rebecca Lawson closed her notebook. "I've spent 30 years studying sustainable housing." She looked toward Harold. "I've never seen a home that respects a living tree this completely." The architect nodded. "We usually ask how nature can adapt to our buildings." He smiled. "You asked how your building could adapt to nature." Within weeks, their independent report spread throughout architectural and environmental organizations across the country. Universities requested copies. Engineering journals discussed the design. Forestry agencies praised its respect for living ecosystems. The documentary received millions of additional views. Soon journalists began referring to Harold's remarkable creation by a new name. One of America's smartest hidden eco-homes. Television producers offered contracts. Publishing companies proposed books. Construction firms suggested expensive partnerships. Harold declined every offer. One reporter finally asked him why. Harold rested one weathered hand against the ancient redwood before answering. "I never built this place to become famous." He looked upward as sunlight filtered through branches nearly 300 feet above. "I built it so two old people could still wake up every morning believing they belonged somewhere." Around him, cameras continued recording. Yet for a brief moment, the only sound anyone heard was the quiet wind moving through the giant redwood, as though the ancient tree itself quietly approved. 3 years passed, and the seasons continued their quiet dance beneath the towering redwoods of Northern California. Morning fog still drifted through Redwood National Park before the sun painted the ancient trunks with warm golden light. Birds nested where silence had once settled, and visitors often paused beneath the giant trees, not to admire a famous landmark, but to remember the story that had quietly restored their faith in what a home could truly mean. Life had changed for Harold and Clara Miller, though not in the way many people expected. The millions of viewers who had watched Ethan Brooks' documentary never forgot them. Instead of sending expensive gifts, people from every corner of America began donating small amounts of money. $5, $20, sometimes only a handwritten letter with a single sentence. "Thank you for reminding us what matters." Ethan organized every contribution with complete transparency, refusing sponsorships or advertising contracts connected to the story. He insisted that the kindness belonged entirely to Harold and Clara. By the following spring, local volunteers, retired carpenters, electricians, and neighbors gathered near the edge of the forest to build the couple a modest cedar cabin on public land approved by local authorities. Harold offered to help frame the walls, but everyone laughed gently and told him this time he was the customer, not the builder. The finished cabin was beautiful in its simplicity. A wide front porch overlooked the Redwood Valley. Large windows welcomed the morning sunlight. A small vegetable garden surrounded the home. Clara planted lavender, rosemary, and wildflowers beside the walkway, while Harold built a handcrafted bench beneath a young maple tree using reclaimed cedar from an old fence. Visitors assumed the couple would finally leave the hidden tree behind. They were wrong. Every Friday evening, Harold packed 2 blankets. Clara carried a basket filled with homemade bread and tea, and together they walked the familiar forest trail toward the ancient redwood. They still spent every weekend inside the hidden home where their second life had quietly begun. One Saturday morning, Ethan arrived carrying fresh coffee. He smiled as Harold rocked gently beside the fireplace. "You finally have a real house." Harold looked around the living tree before answering. "So do you think this isn't one?" No one spoke for several moments. The fire crackled softly. Outside, rain tapped gently against the enormous trunk. Ethan simply smiled. He finally understood. The cabin had given them comfort. The tree had given them hope. Late that autumn, 2 unfamiliar vehicles slowly entered the valley. Harold recognized them immediately. Ryan Miller stepped out first. The once confident businessman looked almost unrecognizable. His expensive tailored suits had disappeared, replaced by simple jeans, a plaid shirt, and worn hiking boots. Gray had spread through his dark hair, and deep lines surrounded tired green eyes that no longer hid behind confidence. Years of regret had humbled him far more than financial failure ever had. Emily Foster climbed from the second vehicle moments later. Her elegant appearance had softened into something much simpler. She wore an ordinary wool sweater beneath a light jacket, and although her posture remained graceful, tears filled her hazel eyes before she managed to speak. Carrying no gifts, no documents, and no excuses, both siblings stood silently beneath the towering redwoods like frightened children returning home after being lost for far too long. "I'm sorry," Ryan whispered. His voice broke before he could continue. Emily wiped away tears. "We thought we were protecting you." Harold looked at both of them quietly. Years earlier, he might have searched for explanations. Now he searched only for healing. Without saying another word, he turned toward the giant redwood. He reached beneath the familiar curtain of moss. The hidden panel slowly opened. Ryan and Emily stared in disbelief as warm firelight spilled into the cool afternoon air. They followed their parents inside. Nothing had changed. The old rocking chairs still faced the fireplace. The small bookshelf remained full. Family photographs still rested on the shelf exactly where Harold had placed them years before. Even the wooden dining table remained unchanged. 4 chairs surrounded it. Not 2. 4. Harold gently rested one hand on the back of a chair. Then he looked at his children. His voice remained calm. A home isn't measured by its size. He paused as Clara quietly reached for his hand. Only by the love waiting inside. Neither Ryan nor Emily could answer. Both quietly sat down at the same table where they had once celebrated birthdays, Christmas dinners, and ordinary evenings they had never imagined would become priceless memories. Outside, the giant redwood continued standing exactly as it had for centuries. Patient, steadfast, forgiving. Many years later, tourists still traveled to Northern California hoping to hear the legend of the hidden house inside the ancient redwood. Some came searching for remarkable architecture. Others came because they had watched Ethan's documentary during difficult moments in their own lives. Almost no one remembered the elderly couple who had once been mistaken for homeless. Instead, people remembered something far greater. They remembered a secret door hidden inside a giant living tree. And beyond that door, they remembered a quiet home that taught millions of people around the world that love, forgiveness, and belonging will always make stronger walls than wood, stone, or concrete ever could. Sometimes, God's greatest miracles don't appear as something spectacular. Sometimes, they come as an open door when every other door has been closed. Harold and Clara thought they had lost everything, but God had already prepared a place where hope could grow again. Their story reminds us that a true home is not built with wealth or walls. It is built with love, forgiveness, and faith that God is still working, even when we cannot see His plan. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe kindness, family, and faith still matter, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your family, and fill your heart with His peace. Amen.